and this is the 19-9 Podcast. Today, we're heading back to Press Row with Vahe Gregorian, a Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist. Vahe has covered more than 20 Final Fours and has spent a good chunk of his career reporting on college hoops, including men's basketball programs at Missouri and Kansas.
But the game I really want to point out that you may not know about, Missouri-Illinois, which it was triple overtime, 108-107.
Wow.
I get goosebumps thinking that game. I got home that night and couldn't sleep.
In this wide-ranging conversation with Vahe, we're going to discuss some of his top memories from Missouri hoops, the unique vibe of Kansas basketball, and a Ghostbuster story.
A few months later, Mad Magazine came out with a spoof of it called Ghost Dusters. And the second panel is a caricature of my dad.
Oh my
with
God.
Bill Murray and Harold Ramis.
Now, on to the show.
Isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19.
Vahe, thanks for joining us here today.
Good morning, guys. Great to be with you. Thanks for what you do, and thanks for including me.
Yeah, well, we're excited to talk hoops with you, given that rich history you have there. And so, I want to begin by asking you how you got into sports writing, because you got a pretty fascinating backstory. And so I want to put some context around this question. Your late father was a prominent academic who ran the New York Public Library. He held administrative posts at Ivy League colleges. You yourself hold a degree in English from Penn. You were born in Lebanon. So I guess the polite way to say this is, how do you end up in the center of the U.S. writing about college basketball and other sports?
It's funny the way you put it. It's very close to the way I always tell people that my parents met in college in California. My mom's from New Jersey. My dad's from Iran. I was born in Beirut, and that's why I'm in Kansas City. It's just sort of where life takes you, I guess. Sort of the long and short of it is, though, that my dad did come here to go to college and met my mom there. She was from New Jersey, and I was born in Lebanon because they went back there for him to do his dissertation in Afghanistan.
Wow. Holy cow.
So, and kind of the cool, adventurous part of the story, at least as it relates to my mother, is that she was about 23 or 24, and he went off to Afghanistan for a couple of months and left her in Beirut, which was a vastly different place then. I mean, they called it the Paris of the Middle East, and she was in her glory. She loved that. So it was a little bit of a journey for her, but pretty cool. So then we came back here, and to your point before, he was in academia, which is one of those jobs that can take you all over. So he was at San Francisco State and then the University of Texas, and that's where I kind of caught the bug for sports. We were in Austin in the late 60s, early 70s, and I just became obsessed with football and got to go to a couple Longhorns games. And then by the time we got to Pennsylvania, that fever had taken. We went there when I was about seventh grade. And so ultimately, I just took great interest in sports from there. And then when I went to college at Penn, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I just knew that I was going to be an English major. I thought I was going to teach and coach. And something I kept telling people I was going to write, and then I just never did it. And ultimately, after a couple jobs right after college, I just figured I had to take the grad school plunge in journalism at Missouri. I just needed to reset. So the other thing, though, I do feel like saying this, and not because of anything I did, but it's sort of the Woody Allen 90% of life is showing up thing. One of the great experiences of my life was playing football at Penn, and I always feel the need to tell people I played left out and didn't get on the field much. But it was a really cool experience that I think it also has informed how I look at sports. We were pretty bad for a couple of years, won 2 games in 3 years. And then my senior year, we tied for the Ivy Championship. And those lessons and those bonds are really sort of ever present in me today. I am still close to a lot of people from those days, and I think we got a lot out of that.
That's awesome. Listen to that. We're going to need to do another podcast just on your background there. That's an amazing story, traveling around like that.
Well, I'm glad I didn't put you to sleep.
No.
Yeah.
I'm was a history teacher before becoming a principal / podcast host. so I love that kind of stuff. I also heard New York Public Library in there and wanted to know if you had to chase people down for their late book fees. I had Seinfeld. I've been rewatching that on Netflix. So
it's funny. It's funny you say that. My dad never really quite got the joke, but the Mr. Bookman episode on is one of the funniest ones on Seinfeld. I think I laugh a little harder because of that background. The other thing, I've got it up here in my office room somewhere. I don't immediately see it, but in the I guess it would have been, I can't remember exactly what year Ghostbusters came out.
Yeah.
But it came out when my dad was president of the New York Public Library.
Wow.
And he didn't even know it was the scenes were filmed there. I don't know what was really filmed there. But a few months later, Mad Magazine came out with a spoof of it called Ghost Dusters. And I just learned then how maniacal those people were. And the second panel is a caricature of my dad.
Oh my
with
God.
Bill Murray and Harold Ramis.
Amazing.
And you guys have seen the magazine. I mean, you always figure those are just random faces you see walking with the stars. And
yeah.
There he is. Anyway, he hit up Mad Magazine for a donation to the library, and they said that they're a cheap outfit.
That's amazing. Okay, so I got to ask you about the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, 25 years, so a good chunk of that covering Missouri basketball. Coach Norm Stewart remains a prominent figure in that program's history and kind of helped raise their profile. So do you have a favorite Norm Stewart story or a series of stories maybe?
Yeah, well, Norm was a really fascinating and complicated guy to cover. He built that program in some ways from scratch. I mean, he took it over in the late 60s when they had back-to-back 3-win seasons. And he, as a Missouri native, guy who played at Missouri, a guy who didn't really want you to know, he had the school record for most shots taken in a game. It was personal to him, and part of it being personal to him was the way he built the program, with a lot of, in the early days, especially a lot of just hard-nosed Missouri kids. And then as it got traction, the recruiting base changed, and then they became rather a nationally prominent program with a lot of top 10 moments and a lot of runs, but not a lot of deep tournament runs. And that sort of is a bummer asterisk to it. I mean, Norm has made his peace with never going to a Final Four, but I think that was hard on him during the career. There were a couple teams that were really capable and just didn't work out one way or another. So, but for the media, he was always interesting to challenge, but to cover. But he had a bit of an edge, and I tell people all the time it was a great laboratory for the Missouri students coming through. I didn't think you would ever have a guy that would be more sort of multifaceted and interesting to cover, but also that you had to learn how to ask your questions properly. Yeah. You had to learn how to deal with some heat. And I say all this, and I also note this though, that we had some big run-ins over the years, and I just ended up kind of feeling like, you have to hang in the pocket. And I think over time it became that kind of relationship. One of my favorite stories about him is it's actually when he lost his job, or when he resigned or retired, whatever happened. To this day, that's been very difficult to trace. It was a little bit sudden, and I had a couple sources I thought were impeccable say that he was forced out, and a couple sources that I thought were impeccable that said, nope, it was absolutely his choice. And so you had to play that pretty evenly. But when I wrote the initial story, I had an appointment with him in his office the next day, and I come in to see him, and he looks at me and he says, I am incensed at you. I am incensed at your newspaper. That article was awful. And okay, what do you need? Huh. And that's kind of how it became. And I tell that story with a certain fondness because I really enjoy my relationship with Norm today. I feel like we talk openly about a lot of things. I'm not in touch with him as much as I should be, but I think he's a very interesting man. I've probably gone on too long about it, but he's also very funny and did a lot for Missouri basketball. And I'm glad I've gotten to know him the way I have.
I like that description of staying in the pocket. I think sometimes sticking around as a reporter, you have to be willing to weather those storms. What did you have any advice for the students when they'd be asking him questions? Because I know just like with the Coach K blow up, it has to be like it's such a scary moment because you don't get a lot of opportunities to ask your question, and I'm sure you take your time coming up with those questions. So you're really trying to figure out what to ask to get a good response, but also not get that type of response.
Yeah, just, I think that the way I always looked at it was you have to be prepared to sustain at least one or two blows. Do think hard about how you word your questions. And when I tell this to other people, I'm actually saying it to myself too, to remind myself, you can't really just wing it. I mean, I think the longer you're at this, the more kind of at ease you can get about it, but you still need to be thinking properly about, okay, what's the question that's going to elicit an answer instead of just anger? Or what's the question that's going to make it, something that's not just a soundbite. And so that's always tough. And I to this day, every time I listen back to tape of an interview, I ask myself, well, why didn't I shut up there? Or why did I say so much there? Just like right now when I keep going on. But I do think that the place that I think gets hard for especially a student reporter, but even any of us that have been around a while, is how to make sure you're being respectful but not being intimidated. And it even comes down to little things. I think there was that big flap with, I didn't follow exactly how it went with Deion Sanders wanting to be called coach.
Yeah.
I almost always call a coach by his first name. I'm not sure where I picked that up, but I think it just felt like, you want to be on some even terrain on that. And, I think you can be respectful while doing that. Yeah. I don't think it's, you're calling him by his last name.
Right. Yeah.
So, but anyway, I probably digress from what you're asking, Aaron, but
I think that hits it right on. You want to be deferential, but not go over the top with it.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, you could write a book on the dynamics of kind of the dance of the beat writer, particularly. Yeah. People like, you've had Mike Waters and Jerry Tipton, two of the best in the business, on there. And I bet you if you got 15, 20 people together and just talked about how you try to work this day in, day out, you don't want to be an adversary. You don't want to be a public relations arm of the university. You're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And that fully informs how you try to do the job. And Norm, just back to him for a second, he always liked to say he didn't hold grudges, but he had a long memory.
Yeah.
And so everything was kind of all within one long, big body of work with him. Everything was on that spectrum.
Well, hey, Vahe, we've talked a lot about Coach Stewart here, and Quinn Snyder follows Coach Stewart, and he made an immediate impact on the Tigers, but his tenure didn't end so rosy. So, Coach Snyder, of course, worked his way back up the basketball food chain, has enjoyed a successful run as head coach of the Utah Jazz in the NBA. But how would you sum up Coach Snyder's run in Missouri?
More importantly, how do you sum up his hair at Missouri?
I'll tell you what, his hair was the envy of even of us who were in our 30s back then.
He'd have his own Twitter account now.
And I'll tell you what, though, we're joking about his hair, but that did speak a little bit to what was going on at Missouri. Quinn was kind of the anti-norm. He was about the hottest young coach in the country, although along with another hot coach named Bill Self, they both were in the running for this job. And we've heard different versions of the backstory on what happened, but there is a there's a parallel universe where Bill Self got the job,
Wow.
and probably Bill doesn't go to Kansas from Missouri. Now, maybe Bill's still at Missouri.
Yeah.
And but I digress a little bit. But I do think the thinking was that they wanted to go a completely different direction. We see this happen in the corporate world. You see it happen in a lot of places where you decide, well, we've had the whatever norm was 68-year-old guy who's been here for 35 years. Now we want the 35-year-old guy who's, the Duke pedigree.
Yeah.
It appeared to be, I remember when Quinn was hired, the feeling was like among Missouri fans and even media, it's like, can't believe they got Quinn Snyder to come here. Quinn Snyder. I'd been around Quinn a little bit before he took the job, just a little bit. I was doing more of a national and regional college basketball beat at the time. And I was over, I think it was at Cameron, but I was over there for something with a couple St. Louis kids playing and witnessed Quinn in the locker room. And it was the most unusual thing I remember seeing in a long time in college basketball, where the assistant coach in the locker room was the one everybody went to talk to. He was like the Pied Piper.
Wow.
He was so smart. And anyway, but what happened with that was they kind of gave Quinn the keys to the kingdom and just said, go. And I think Quinn, it was too much too fast. He was very smart, a little fast and loose with the rules, always made us wonder how they did it at Duke, especially since, we could FOI things you can't get at private schools. I mean, we saw some patterns there that made you wonder, really. But on the other hand, it's, Quinn has to own whatever he did. So the bottom line of the Quinn era was they had some big moments, but it was, I'll always think of it as being chaotic and frantic, and that Quinn was always off balance in a certain way. And I want to underscore that by saying I think it was quite a fall from grace for him during those years. And I felt for him. I didn't really understand him, but I always felt for him. And I am so pleased to see what's happened since, and how he really earned his way toward what he's got now. And I'd love to talk to him again one day. I think he prefers to forget the Missouri years, though. I really do. Although I would assume also, though, that he got something out of that, even if it was just learning from what he could have done differently.
Yeah, those are tough lessons, but you also have that growth. If you can get a certain amount of space from it, it could give you that opportunity to look back at it more fondly. I think that in the moment, a lot of those things probably are more painful. But you're right. He's had such success. I wondered just with the Mark Turgeon news, fast forwarding just to the present day, just coaches in general, the way that they leave. How do you go about like reporting on something like that? Like, do you come at it with that same kind of delicacy, or is it like, I have to find, the information as quickly as possible and just put out whatever I hear, as long as it's sourced?
Yeah, that's a really great kind of industry-wide question. I'm just thinking about the Norm to Quinn moment, which really was, I can't believe it, but almost a generation ago. Now that we look back at that timing, but even then, I remember I was on a train coming back from the Final Four, a train not from the Final Four, a train from the St. Louis airport to my home, and got the news, and then next thing you know, we're just making as many calls as you can. And a lot of times it seems like what's happened is that those circles, those avenues into these things have really tightened over the years. And I don't know whether it's just places have kind of gotten more corporate, for lack of a better term, or more buttoned down. And you have, I think, fewer really direct and immediate relationships, especially now in the last couple of years with COVID, with people willing to tell you stuff. I mean, this is just a side point, but maybe one of the best so-called scoops I ever got was when Missouri was hiring Larry Smith to be the football coach. And the reason I got that scoop was that was back in the day of the Big 8 Skywriters football tour, where you went around to every Big 8 school. And at Oklahoma State, I had lunch with a guy who was going to be on a different coach's staff at Missouri if they got the job. And then he told me one night that the other guy got it. Now, I would never know that guy today.
Yeah.
And you just wouldn't. So
Yeah.
I think there's just more of an inclination for places to get the breaking news, keep it packaged, and or it's one or two select outlets that get it. For whatever reason, some people haven't caught on to the fact that if we write it in the Kansas City Star, it still goes around the country.
Yeah.
They'd rather get the big explosion. But anyway, it's probably not really what you were asking.
No, that was right in. I like a peek behind the curtain there, because I think it's just fascinating how information moves now. You know, it's like, is it about the relationship? You know, because sometimes you in the NBA or even in college basketball, it's like so much about reporting is about forging those relationships. But then, like you said, the information channels, maybe they try to bypass those for a different set of reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing, you know, you got to always be wary of, and you are, but you know, why is somebody telling me this?
Yeah.
And you know, how am I being used? And if you have long-time relationships, you might recognize that people, you know, may still have their own self-serving motivations to tell you things. On the other hand, if the relationship is really a relationship, you also understand that you can really talk about what's going on in ways that you couldn't. And a lot of times, and this is maybe a little lost in this era, a lot of times your relationships are also good kind of bumper guards to keep you from saying what's wrong.
Yeah.
Even if you can't overtly say it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just worry about it, starting with the very way we went into this question, the thought you had about how much people just feel the pressure to get the page views and get something up first that's not necessarily fully correct, but close enough in the view of whoever they work for.
You know, one of the things we love doing, just shifting gears a little bit, is rewatching some old games. So we do a series kind of called the Rewatchables. So is there a game from all the years covering Missouri basketball that sticks out, or just one that you'll never forget, that you know, with the YouTube archives now, just to go back, and if you could find it, just like I'd love to see that again, or just sticks in your memory?
Well, there are a few. You know, the one that you'll know offhand is and it's sad for Missouri fans, but it just was an unbelievable game, was the Tyus Edney 4.8 seconds left. I remember that was in Boise, and I remember I was at the Michigan-Colorado game. I don't know if you guys remember that, when the Cordell Stewart's Hail Mary.
Of course.
But that was one of two or three times in my 35 years in this business where I remember subconsciously standing up from my seat as the play was unfolding and seeing it happen. And that was that way with Tyus Edney. But the game I really want to point out that you may not know about, it was, I guess it was 93, Christmas of 93. It was Missouri, Illinois, which you may be familiar with that game in St. Louis every year. It's a spectacle.
Yeah.
It's
Intense.
kind of the classic, you know, half Illinois fans, half Missouri fans, and the feeling of the holiday season. And there have been some years the games have been real clunkers, but this was the last game at the old St. Louis Arena, which was just a beautiful pit. And it was triple overtime, 108-107.
Wow.
And I get goosebumps thinking of that game. I got home that night and couldn't sleep. There have been some games like that, but usually they're games that are like a Super Bowl or a Final Four where the consequences were so huge. This was just the beauty of the game itself.
That's awesome.
I would urge you, if you could ever find that, to check it out. I mean, and some of the drama that comes to mind is, you know, Missouri had like 6 guys foul out, and at one point Norm was trying to send somebody back in the game that had fouled out and had to be told he was out of the game, you know, things like that. The other part of the Norm spectacle in that game was, I think it was the end of the first overtime. It might have been the end of the second overtime, that a foul was called to put Kewan Garris at the line with like a second left in the overtime, and you know, the game was tied. And he was a freshman who was a good free throw shooter, and Norm was at half court, probably should have gotten a technical, but didn't, and screaming at Kewan, and he missed them both. So that team went on to go 14-0 in the Big Eight.
Wow.
And that was another one of those really good teams that bowed out in the tournament.
So, hey, Vahe, we've talked a lot about Missouri basketball here. You make the move from St. Louis Post-Dispatch to the Kansas City Star in 2013. You move heavily into Kansas Jayhawk territory. So what has it been like for you seeing that blue blood program up close? Because certainly you touched bases with it throughout your time in St. Louis, but now you're around the program a little bit more often. You're really in Kansas Jayhawk territory.
Well, it's really been fun. And let me go back one step here. So when I was an intern at the Post-Dispatch, a friend of mine got tickets on the day of the game offered me tickets on the day of the game to the Kansas-Oklahoma national title game in 1988. And I just, as we say out here, saddled up and drove over to Kemper. And I just, I to this day, can't properly express the sense of wonder walking into that atmosphere. Yeah. It was just unbelievable. And you may remember that game. They were tied 50-50 at halftime, and Danny and the Miracles and all that. So that was really my first real impression of Kansas basketball. And
that's a good one.
And it was a good one. And then I think the first Kansas-Missouri game I ever covered was, I think it was 89 at Allen Fieldhouse. That was my first time at Allen Fieldhouse. And it was a big Monday game. And I want to say they were both in the top 5. And again, I was just out of my mind with what I was getting to see. I just it was just this wonderland. And so those were my first impressions of Kansas basketball. And over the years, one of the things, this has changed a little bit too, but back in the Big 8 days, especially, again, you knew all the coaches. I mean, you had relationships with coaches at the other schools, and I got to know Roy Williams pretty well. And I was over there mostly for Missouri games, but a time or two for other games. And I've known Bill Self a long time, and I've had the really true privilege of being at Allen Fieldhouse some 25, 30, 40 times over the years, I guess. So that has changed a little bit from what the point you're making, which is being over here and being kind of in the heart of the territory. It's just the oddity of it has been that since I've been here, Missouri and Kansas had stopped playing until, what's coming up. So the first column I wrote for the Star was about how they need to resume the rivalry. And I learned a lot about the rivalry from all the heat I took from Kansas fans for, saying that they need to keep playing because they were so furious at Missouri about leaving for the SEC that it was blind anger. And maybe that's insulting because it makes it sound like it wasn't informed. I mean, what I really mean is that place where you see red. Yeah. And you're past your basic anger. So I don't know exactly why that was that way. I know Bill Self. To me, Bill was the lightning rod for that. I love Bill, but I thought he was a little over the top in saying, "Well, they left the conference. Why should we play them?" Well, because it's still a good rivalry, and you can say it's not the same when they leave the conference, but it's kind of your choice that it's not the same because you could still play them.
Yeah.
But I did come to recognize that things needed to cool off. And I also will say this. I love the rivalry. I know we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I had some people point this out to me, and it's a little true that there are some ways these rivalries, we pump these things up and we get excited about them and all that, but they can get a little toxic. I mean, when people, really talk about hatred, and things like that, you worry sometimes they really mean it.
Yeah.
And this one, let's remember, is rooted in some of the most savage fighting in the Civil War. I mean, there are people that still refer to that almost in the active tense around here. And that's one thing you don't know until you move to the Kansas City area, that, State Line Road it's just a road, but it's a little bit of a divider to some people. And there's some drama in how people frame that, but there are some people who still feel it.
Going into that, though, I want to get your take on just rivalries or even the conferences in general, because I think it's changed a little bit with the way that national TV, and it seems like every game you can find on TV now. It used to be so much was dependent on where you were geographically, but you can follow whatever team you want now. I mean, I know there's just Duke fans all over the country, or vice versa. If you're in Missouri, you can live in New York City and follow the team on some network or app or something like that. And you've got the Oklahoma and Texas departing the Big 12, moving to the SEC. You got Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, and UCF moving to the Big 12. Do you think that the conferences matter in the way that they do? I mean, they're organizing, but I don't know. I'm starting to feel confused about what's a conference mean besides just the way that the games are organized. It doesn't feel like the rivalries are within them are the same as they used to be.
I feel very much the same way, and I guess I don't know what the answer is. On one hand, I was, and in some kind of weird, at least subconscious way, I still cling to this. Like I'm enough of a dinosaur to want there to still be a Big 8, and I think, yes, you create new so-called rivalries, or we're without borders in some ways with TV, right? Because of what you just said. But I don't know what the clamor is for the Michigan-Rutgers game, and
wait till you get UCF at Oklahoma State.
Exactly. And we had some fun with that here, where when that latest round went down and the Big 12, I guess theoretically expanded, right?
Yeah.
And know that Andy Reid, with BYU, Andy Reid of the Chiefs now is a Big 12 legend. Stuff like that, because they're in the conference now. But I feel like I can say this till I'm blue in the face. I mean, I feel like much more has been lost than gained.
Yeah.
And the reason I'll have to say it till I'm blue in the face is because it's all about the money. And if you can reap that harvest, then you do. And but I think that again, you're kind of using the peg of this game, that this really does fit that point. I mean, something particularly in Kansas City has been lost with Missouri and Kansas. And even though I'm saying Kansas was perfectly free to play Missouri when Missouri left, it is a fact that Missouri left it. I mean, Missouri put the Big 12 behind it. And, we could talk all day about the dynamics of that, and maybe that's another time. But the point is, that history was torn up by Missouri. And it's being torn up by Texas and Oklahoma. And it's been, look across the board. You can see it everywhere. So I joke all the time that at some point they're going to break these conferences, these mega conferences. They're going to become mega conferences. Then they're going to break them down into pods of 4 or 8. And they're going to call it like the Big 8 and the Southwest Conference.
Yeah. Seems like they're headed towards maybe like, NBA model or a football, where it's like Eastern Conference, Western Conference, and maybe something, a little bit of quads in there or something like that. But that'd be the way to reorganize it, just nationally rather than regionally. Yeah.
I feel like I leave nothing off the table on where this is going. In fact, I actually don't think my headlights can quite picture what's coming.
Yeah. Interesting.
I think we're certainly in store for some big changes. And so much of it's going to be probably driven by football, of course, and basketball will kind of be left holding the sack.
Well, look, I think you're hitting an interesting point, and I've really thought about this, and you guys probably were more alert than I was from the get. More has been lost than is gained by this, and I think the fabric of what we care about is torn up. And now I do remember what I was going to say. This was obvious to you guys probably long before it was to me, but I learned in that merry-go-round of realignment that I thought men's basketball and football were in some ways on equal standing in how the considerations of such things. And where I'm going with this, not at all, as it turns out. And football drives everything, and television drives football, and money drives television. And it made me pretty cynical. And I feel like maybe I resent all the all the realignment because of that, because of the unmistakable truth it kind of got at.
What do you most enjoy about being at the Final Four?
Well, I do love the feeling of, as I was describing in '88, just that sense of wonder. It still is that when you go. It's a bit of a surreal place, and now it's for different reasons, right? We're in these mega stadiums, and I think some of the intimacy's been lost. But not to get too much inside sports on this, but one of the things whenever we go to these events now, especially after you've been around a few years, is the camaraderie with our brothers and sisters in the business. There's so many people that are so great at their jobs, but also I think look at themselves as part of something bigger themselves, even with the hard individual work you do, that there's a collegiality that I'm not sure people understand is very sustaining in this business. So that becomes kind of the annual gathering spot. I'm not going every year anymore, but I get there often enough. And look, the games themselves, they're not always classics, but I was trying to think about this when we were putting this together, and I think to myself, I was there for some moments that were pretty unforgettable, whether it was Chris Webber asking for the timeout or Mario Chalmers hitting that shot, and I was sitting right at the angle where Gordon Hayward launched that shot in the Duke Butler game, and I thought it was going in.
Yeah, ultimate Hoosiers moment.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Just real quick, what do you think of the NIL stuff? I haven't got to ask many reporters about it, but I wondered if there were stories that you're looking for in there, or if it's still too new to have a sense of where it's going.
I feel like I should understand the ramifications better than I do, but I think to myself about the Jimbo Fisher line from Texas A&M. Did you remember hearing this? That he said that there's always been NIL. It's just now that it's legal. And I think there's some truth to that. I think there's been some fun in it and some really good opportunities for people that wouldn't get it otherwise. I guess I'm not so I don't find as much appeal in the Alabama quarterback getting $1 million as I do with somebody in a less visible sport being noticed and getting some, real opportunity. Mm-hmm. Like, near and dear to us here is the, I don't know if you followed the story with Kansas beating Texas, but I went out to his hometown, to Jared Casey's hometown to do a story on what Plainville, Kansas is like after that. Nice. And that was right when he was suddenly doing the Applebee's commercial. And for like $1,500, which is, not a big payday. And most of that's in gift certificates, but you get the idea that how can that not make you smile? And I'm a guy who has long felt like I don't really think athletes should be paid. I feel like these scholarships and connections you're going to make through that are, of a value that you couldn't put a price on. But I have certainly been persuaded over time that, when you're using my name or you're using, literally my likeness, and I'm not getting anything from it, there's something really off about that. And so that sort of changed how I looked at it. It's funny, right here I have a pen fundraising letter that has a picture of one of my friends on there from 1982. And I emailed him the other day and said, with the NIL stuff going on today, he should be entitled to some money if they're going to put him on fundraising literature.
He needs to get in on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. 5 stars only, like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 19.9 social media so you never miss a release. Until next time,